Hi, and welcome to On the Couch, Conversations with Brenda Porter, where I sit down with theater professionals and those who work with theater and talk about what they do and how they do it. Please make sure that you comment below, subscribe, and like us. Our special guest today is Amina McIntyre. Amina McIntyre is a playwright based in Atlanta, whose productions and readings have included Actors Express, Atlanta History Museum, Working Title Playwrights, Out of Hand Theater, the Blue Series, and Vanguard Repertory Theater, where she was a Susie Bass Award winner. She was a playwright apprentice at Horizon Theater Company. She was the managing director of Caribou Performing Arts. She is the co-founder of the Hush Harbor Lab, and she is currently working on a PhD in religion at Vanderbilt University. Welcome, Amina.
Hi, thank you, Brenda. So glad to be here.
So, Amina, you are a playwright, and you have a company that you are co-founded, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
First, going to ask you about this thing that's happening behind you. What's happening behind you?
So I am in one of the rooms in the library. I am a PhD student at Vanderbilt. So I actually spend half my time between Atlanta and Nashville. And in the room that I'm in currently, somebody, I guess in preparation for finals, put this amazing equation up about alkalines. So if anybody needs to know about alkalines, I'll take a picture of it and send it to them. But there's even somebody, you're gonna laugh. Somebody even wrote, "Thanks for whoever did this. It was helpful." And so I did not, even though I was like, I want to do an aesthetic, I was like, yeah, but if I do that, then whoever was helpful, I would have erased all their work, even though it'll eventually be erased. I figured for now, we'll just leave it there. But I am not getting a PhD in all of this. I am getting a PhD in religion, specifically religion, psychology, and culture. I'm looking at how to use the arts as pastoral care and how we can use theater in the care process. In a nutshell. Yeah.
What made you decide to go that route?
Well, I do ministry work as well. So I'm an ordained minister in my denomination. And I got my call to ministry around the time that I really was like, I'm a playwright. And I was like, I don't know how to choose between the two. And so I decided to do both. And so I actually have an MFA in playwriting and a PhD, and I'm getting a PhD in religion. And it was really, when I started working on my PhD, it was just kind of the place, because I looked at doing performance studies and theater as well. But when I started talking about the work that I wanted to do, the place that ended up being the most open was the religion departments. And so I have been, this is my third year in my PhD program. And so I'm in the exam year, so I'm done with coursework, but I still have about a couple of years left before I'm done with it. Marguerite Hannah, who's at Horizon, and she's always talking to me. She's like, okay, now I'm glad you're going to school, but do not forget to write. Please keep writing plays, keep doing this. And so we have a lot of conversations. But also when I did my chaplaincy training, I found that there is some things called arts and medicine, and where you can bring arts into the room with people, especially after they've experienced a trauma. And one of the things that made me know that this was kind of the course that I needed to go was there was a woman who had to make a decision about her husband who had a stroke, and the doctors couldn't talk to her. She was like, this is my high school sweetheart. I don't care what you say. She just would not make any decision. And it was almost going on like a week or so. And it was hard, but I sat down with her and I was like, let's write a poem. And we sat down and we wrote a poem about her husband. And we wrote a poem about just the things that she remembered about him. And we had all these great memories and such. And once we were done with the poem, she was able to make decisions about her husband. And so for me, it just kind of showed me the power of how the arts could be used in a care space and in a care room for that purpose. So, but it just was one of those, I was like, oh, I had never thought about how to merge all of my worlds together. And that was really what drove me to say I need to go and do some deeper study and to tell people more, hey, this is what can happen. And this is how care can work, instead of, especially because when we are faced with a trauma, we already are like, have all these things to do and everything seems rough and nothing seems like the right answer, but being able to be eased through an answer in a different kind of way can be helpful, I think.
Well, I've always believed in the power of healing of the arts. I think,
Mhm.
I mean, and the power to change through the arts. The arts are so powerful, which is why I've never understood why schools eliminate it first. They go,
Right,
we need to get rid of some programs. The arts, we don't need painting, we
right,
don't need theater, we don't need. It's like, yes, we do. We do.
right, right. Or like when we through a pandemic, what's the first thing that people did? Where's Netflix? And if it wasn't for Netflix, half the people, or Hulu, half the people would not have made it through the pandemic, in all honesty. So,
Right.
mhm.
Which does, since you've mentioned that, brings me to the I the the thought about the pandemic and how it has affected the arts. Has
Mhm.
has it also affected your area of of ministry?
Yes. So, well, one, just kind of same way with theater. All ministries went online. I was president of one of the groups in my denomination at the time that the pandemic started, and it's extended my presidency a year. We had to rethink one of our major conferences and think about how to reach people, and how to really work with thinking about what ministry was and how it can impact, because ministry was never meant to be in a vacuum. It was never meant to be just in an edifice. And I also, since I think of ministry as a broader sense about how people live their religion and how they live their lives and how that ministers to others, that has really just kind of made it so that people have to think back to, okay, so when we didn't just have a building, or when we didn't just have this crutch, or when we didn't just have these things, how we could imagine where it is and how we can rethink how we were in those spaces. And also too, how we can be human in those spaces, because when something becomes so regular or so much of our routine, we forget the ritual part of it. Because there's ritual in even this conversation, and how you think it through and how you do it. And there's a certain way that you've said it and certain power that comes from these conversations. But we overlook it by being like, oh, I'm just going to go have a conversation. And so I think that that's absolutely some parts of it. So, so it's really changed ministry for me in that rethinking, okay, so if I was already bored with a part of ministry, that's fine. Ministry requires you to be innovative. So how do we become more innovative and think about how to meet people where they are in their lived space, so they can still feel connected? And I think too, I'll say this, like even like with most churches that I've talked to who have gone online, they struggle to keep their persons who were sick and shut in, and who could not physically come to church. But the pandemic has made it so that they have started thinking about how to include even those persons who aren't able to come to church on a regular basis.
So your playwriting,
Mhm.
is it connected to your ministry, or do you just write other things that come to mind that
It is a hybrid. So I do write for churches and I do write for ministry, but I also too will put ritual inside the play. There's always some element of, it may not be a full out sermon or anything like that, but I may write a play that to me was like a worship service. And so when people leave, they feel with this kind of feeling, they leave with this feeling of catharsis. The play I had produced a couple years ago with Vanguard Rep, I think is a really good example of it. Within the course of the play, there was a family that needed to heal, and they had all been kind of dreaming this song, and this song became kind of their own kind of hush harbor, and they did their own family ritual that helped them to be able to kind of talk about the grief that they had around their loved one, and to kind of be able to figure out how to move on. And so I'll put it into plays in that kind of way. And I'm always just, and even if it's not, I don't necessarily feel like you have to kind of bash people over the head with what they do when they live. And we all do rituals. We all do that kind of work. We all do ministry work in some kind of way, even if we don't call it that. So yeah, so it definitely shows up. And even if I just got a good laugh out of you, then hopefully you left feeling better. You came in that day.
you mentioned it's the Hush Harbor, which then of course brings me right to your your, your organization, Hush Harbor Lab. Talk to me a little bit about Hush Harbor Lab, how it got its name, how it started, what you do.
Yeah. We're gonna talk all the things. So it actually starts. So this is the cool thing about how community works in Atlanta. So I had known Adaye for a while, and then I wanted to be an apprentice with Horizon, and he was the playwriting apprentice teacher at the time that I did the apprentice company. So we would see each other after that, be like, hey, he's always like, are you writing? We talk and whatever. And so one day we got into a conversation about the new play process, and particularly the fact that Black artists in Atlanta don't get this opportunity to be in new plays. And if they are, they're the only person of color in the cast. And so they're developing a play that is not predominantly about them. They're typically the supporting character in the play, or they're doing a play where they're not in the lab. And so they're doing a play that has already been processed, that has already had that kind of a work done. And so we were like, what would it be like for us to just do a lab? And then we started talking about, okay, so if we want to do that, and we know for a fact that we want to have Black artists in the room, and we want to have people come in, what would make this experience unique? And we both started talking about lab processes that did not work for us. So we knew we wanted the process to be protective of the playwright. We wanted the process to privilege the playwright, where they could actually get all the things out that they needed to do. But we also wanted the director to be a part of the actual creation process. We wanted everyone to be a part of saying, hey, if you're in lab, as a character and as an actor right now, I feel this. Or I'm having questions about this, and how that could actually fuel the playwright in order to be able to kind of take their play to the next level. And so it was really one of those, well, let's do it. And so of course we were like, well, what are we gonna call it? And we have all these conversations about ritual and and religion and all that kind of stuff. And so we were like, what's gonna be real Southern and real like ritually? We were like, well, what about the brush arbor? And so we started talking about brush arbors and hush harbors. And for those who aren't aware, the hush harbor is where most people, they say that the invisible church started. That's at least how Albert Rabbitoe defines it. But it is the place that was kind of off of the plantations, where people could kind of all go down, and persons who were enslaved could come together. They could celebrate, they could praise God, their gods, however they praise God. But it was also a place, and most people don't realize this, not only was it a place for people to do their rituals, so if someone passed away and they needed to do their own rituals that they brought over with them when they came, it was also a place though for a Black market. So people could go there and get their moonshine or get their herbs, and they could trade and barter. We don't really talk about that element of it, because not everybody who went to the Hush Harbor actually was religious. Some people, Thomas Weber talks about it, but some people just went because they were like, oh, I just need to trade some things and I need to see people. People coupled up during those times. So that's where they would meet people. They didn't always intermarry or jump the broom with people from their own particular plantations. They would also sometimes meet people from other places. And then the brush was often where they did that. And we felt like that would be an apt place for us to say, come live your life, be yourself, be protected in this space, bring who you are and what you know and how you do it. And just kind of live and work with people who you may not be able to see on a regular basis. Work with people you've always wanted to work with on a play that you feel like may never have been told, because this may not necessarily be what theaters are producing right now, but work on it anyway, because this is where we want you to be. And so our logo is a bottle tree, because we're super Southern. And of course, bottle trees are supposed to ideally keep away the evil spirits and kind of hold them in the bottle so it doesn't actually permeate the space. And so that's our idea. Yeah, and so we've been around for about almost 2 years now.
And so in that 2-year process, how many projects have you worked on?
We have worked on 5.5. So we last year we did a full season of readings. So we did one for Mia Kristen Smith. So that was our first one. And then we did Adaye Moon's Ezekiel's Will, which is actually going to be having another reading with Actors Express coming up with their Threshold Play Festival next. Then we did Minka Wilkes's Behind the Veil, and she did a show that kind of worked with W.B. Du Bois and kind of his legacy here in Atlanta when he was here. And then I had a show up in the summertime, Nina Simone. It's called Eunice in Paris, and it's kind of like about Nina Simone and her time in Paris. And so this year, most recently, we did And so this was interesting. We're doing some co-productions right now to try to just kind of see, because we do want to be able to branch out and work with other people, but also see how we can bring other stories in. But we did a co-production, collab with Théâtre du Rêve. They're actually making it an actual film. And so one of the reasons we were like, well, it's a story about a Black man that she was trying to get right. And so it kind of worked for our lab as well. And so we kind of brought her in for that. And so, and our half show is we're doing a co-production with Fountain Stages. And they're working on a Diane Moon's Cassie's Ballad that will be at Wawa in May. And so that's what we've been doing. And we have a couple of shows coming up, but that's
a lot during the pandemic when you're just starting off. Oh my gosh.
It is a lot. But we also too, we just kind of take it slow. We were like, let's just maybe do something a season. Our labs are about a week long. And so if you think about like, it's, just 4 weeks out of the season that we had. And then when people take it further, that's great. That's fine. We're doing the lab part. And so we are, it takes us about maybe at the most, once we kind of gotten like once we've cast and everything, it might take us about 2 to 3 weeks to kind of put everything together. And then we just kind of put it on ice for a little bit after that. And then we just kind of come back. But the actual lab process itself only takes it's like a really good intense week of work. And then we kind of show people what we've worked with.
If I were to take my play to another group that was doing, that does work with playwrights, and I were to take my play to your group, what would I find different with you?
Let me see, how do I describe it? What people have told us, because we get feedback from every one of our labs, is that people feel like they have the freedom to offer their constructive criticism, but also be in community with each other. So sometimes when I've gone to labs, and it just kind of depends on the space of the room. Like sometimes the playwright may or may not vibe with the director. They may or may not be able to get all the things out, or something may be said in the room over the course of it where the playwright feels like they can't really speak in the room, or somebody else feels like they can't speak in the room. Sometimes it's really the actors are here to talk, to do the work, but then they may not necessarily participate in the conversation, just depending on what the labs are. So I've had all different kinds of experiences with that. With us, it's what has been told to us every time is that they feel like after maybe like initially meeting everyone all of a sudden feels like family. And everyone feels like as soon as we kind of get in there, we start talking, we start doing it, it just becomes a good conversation. And we also too, we give the playwright space. So we have this reading, we have this good conversation. Even after we have whatever the rehearsal is, we might say, hey, let's stay back and we'll talk to the playwright. We'll check in. How is your health doing? How are you feeling? Like, what are you working on? Like, how are you taking what's going on? And so we really want to make sure that we are understanding their emotional connection to their work, and the fact that playwriting sometimes ain't easy. And hearing your new work isn't easy either. But then we give space. And so for us, sometimes people have said, hey, we wish we could do more rehearsals. And I think that that's valid, but for us, because the process is playwright center, between each rehearsal, we give the playwright at least 36 hours to turn their play around, instead of them having to come back in 12 hours and drop some new pages. We want them to have time to breathe on the play. So if they need to go to sleep for the night, go to sleep for the night. We're fine with it. But we want to make sure that we feel like the playwright is cared for in the process, and that they feel like everyone in the room is for the play itself to do the best it can be and to breathe the best it can be, and to be the best draft, because we're not necessarily sure that it's going to become a final product. It could be a generative lab where people I just want people in the room so I can bring new pages every day and we read and it works and we get some new things. It could be a revising lab, but it's really however you want the lab to be and however it blooms and whatever works best for your process. That's what we really kind of care toward.
So I've had this conversation recently. I've had this conversation about whose right is it to tell your story. So if I, as an African American, feel so moved by, I don't know, the Japanese culture, should I tell a story that is Japanese centered?
Mhm.
Can a white person write my stories? Can an Asian person write African stories? Can we write European stories? So, as a playwright, what's your thoughts on that?
I think it can be sticky because I feel like, and I think this is kind of where labs are helpful. Sometimes we write, or like, for example, we might write characters, a cast that have multicultural characters, that have multicultural stories. And we want to make sure that those stories are told well. I think it's fine for us to think through if we have the story ourselves and we're like, oh, I have this story and I really want to write it. But I do think that we have to be responsible. And so if you want to write a Japanese story and you know nothing about Japanese culture, may not be in your best interest to write Japanese characters without knowing the culture and or being in conversation with people or writing a perspective of the story that will make it so that you can write the part of the culture how you experience it and not necessarily it be the end all be all and you be the one representing that story. So I think it comes down to responsibility. Like, if you write these things, will you be responsible for the voice that it tells? For years, people have written, I say this, I mean, it's more of screenwriting, but I watch a lot of movies now, especially, and people will write a story and I'm just like, yeah, that wasn't necessarily a Black story. We got some Black characters in there, but a white person wrote, and they'd be like, well, how can you tell? I'd be like, well, I won't name this particular film, but there was a well-known Black actor, comedian in it. And I was like, yeah, but they said that their story is somebody, they're from Milwaukee. Well, not Milwaukee, I think they were from like Minnesota and they play hockey. And I was like, I don't know a lot of Black people from Minnesota who play hockey. And if they did, they have a different story to tell than what we focused on here. And there's some other nuances that have to be in there from that particular perspective. And so I think, all that to say, I think there is a kind of yes, but, or kind of yes, and. But I would, for example, if it goes to, for example, if you are a theater commissioning a new work that deals with a Japanese story, you need to get a Japanese actor. If you are a company that is looking, for example, if you are doing screen development and you are a company that you're looking to tell African-American stories, go find a Black writer who can handle that particular story and find someone who's had some of those experiences, because just because if you are Japanese American, you may not have had a Japanese upbringing in that way. If you are, if I'm Black, but I'm not a first generation immigrant from like either an island or an African or for one of the African nations, I can't tell those stories the way that the persons from that space can. So I think it's really more about being willing to be responsible with the stories that you do tell, more than saying, can I write it or can I not? Are you going to take the responsibility for it? And that's it, because we are, especially if it's the only story that's out there like that, if you can't take the full responsibility and be willing to take the backlash that you will get from it, then don't do it. And I just feel like that. I feel like if you're not going to take responsibility, then don't do it. But if you're willing to take responsibility and willing to do the research and really to work, I think is well to take a stab at it, so well as you do it from the experience that you understand and not try to put your views onto something just because you just read a book about it. So
that's a pretty good answer. Yeah, I'd say. Yeah.
It's sticky.
It is very sticky. It's very sticky.
It's very sticky, yeah. I mean, but it's also it's like, kind of like the Young Jing Lee thing, right? When she wrote Straight White Men, right? She wrote this play about straight white guys. And people were like, this was a good play about straight white guys. She's like a living straight white guy culture. Like, so I understand the experiences a certain kind of way. Or like I'm in theater and we read a lot of straight white guy plays. Like, so I understand that kind of nuance in a certain kind of way. And it kind of worked for her in that way. So I think about that particular play, but I mean, but it's sticky. And like I said, it just all comes down to us being willing to accept the consequences of stuff. We don't like to take consequences for things. We don't like to be held accountable. But you got to be willing to be held accountable for what you write and what you put out there, and how it might make other people feel, or how it might engage a community in that way.
So what are you working on now?
Oh, what am I working on now? I have a commission with Horizon Theater Company. I'm in one of the Black Women Speaks cohort. I'm in the emerging cohort. And so I am working on a play actually about Southwest Atlanta, which is where I'm from. I grew up off of South Gordon Street and then moved to off of Benjamin Mays. So I tell people all day, the SWATs, went to Mays High School. So I'm just, I am very much an Atlanta girl. And so I'm currently writing a play about the community that I feel like we're kind of losing. Right now, I believe the play is going to take place on a bus stop with kind of like what high schoolers on a bus stop, and kind of talking about the adventure that happens one day when the bus does not come and they have to get to school, and just kind of the sights and sounds of the community, that kind of thing. So. Yeah. So that's it. And then of course, Diane and I are doing some work with Hush Harbor. We have about 4 plays that we want to have coming up. And so we are doing a little bit of strategizing so that we can make sure. It was one of the things that we do with Hush Harbor too. We want to make sure that we pay our actors and our artists on time. So we typically try to give people the first half of their check the day of the first rehearsal, and end of the check the day that you do everything, so you're not waiting. So we think that's also good mental health work, to not be worried about when your check comes in. So we're actually kind of gearing up for our next group, and we have really 5 playwrights. And so we kind of have an idea for probably about the next year and a half, almost to 2 years, of which labs are going to come up and how we're going to support everyone.
Also, if I had a play that I just wanted to go, hey, I want to get it in Hush Harbor, I have to wait 2 years.
It depends. No, because we also do consult work. So if you're like, we have had people send a note, be like, hey, I just need y'all. I don't want to necessarily have a public reading in the same way. Can I just work with y'all? And we're like, yeah, let's talk about it. So we do have a process. And if you send a hushharborlab@gmail.com, we're also hushharborlab.com. But if you send a note to us and say, hey, we really just kind of want to consult with you, we will be like, hey, so this is what it would take to consult with us. And this is what we will want. And we find out when works for you, that kind of thing. But those are the ones that we already have that we're going to be doing from, like, that we're originating will be about 2 years out. Otherwise, you can still call us.
Okay, so some personal questions.
Yes.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Wow. So in 5 years, I will be done with the PhD. I will have hopefully, I'm just going to say this, we're going to call into this. I actually want to go into screenwriting. And so I do want to do some screen work. I actually have written a screenplay and working on my first TV pilot now. And I have a couple ideas for some shows. But my ultimate goal is to, and I don't want it to be connected with the university, but I want to own a center that works with artists and ministers and allows them an opportunity to restore and rest. I think that most artists don't get a chance to take naps. Most ministers don't take vacations. And I see a lot of my friends get really burnt out. And I think that if people have a space where they can say, you know what, I just need some time to stop, whether they decide they want to use the time to write a new play or do some new creative work, or think through a book project, or if they're just like, I just need to get away from my family and from the, just the ebb and flow of every day to just be myself and sit with myself, then I want to be able to have a space for that. And so that's kind of what I'm working on, is having that location. And so hopefully within the next 5 years, that can be kind of the aim that I'm going toward. So, and I would love to do some urban winery kind of stuff later on too, get some wine going on in there. So, every now and then we need a refreshing drink. So
that's right. You need a place to rest and a drink. There you go.
Mm-hmm. And that cures most people's, it cures most people's issues. I think I have always said that I think that kindergarten had it right, that every day everybody needs to take a nap and they need to get a snack. And I think the world would be a better place if everybody got a nap and a snack every single day.
What advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh my gosh, take more risk. That idea isn't as crazy as you think. The don't worry about whether it works or not, because failure is part of the process. And don't be scared to ask for it. So I think that so many times we get worried about what other people think, or worried about, do I have the money for this? Or worried about, well, what will they say if I just be bold, take the risk and ask for it. And that story that's bubbling in there, they want to hear it. They really do.
What works have you done that you are most proud of?
Oh man. So there are a couple. I just had a small show here. I had one done here at Vanderbilt's campus this past month. And it was a love story. And oh my gosh, I just want to write more love stories now. I just feel like, oh God, we write so many. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm in history and I know we have trauma and hard lives, but God, I just want to see some Black joy and some Black love everywhere, and all the ways that Black love looks like. But I get commissioned with Oakland Cemetery every year. They have the Capturing the Spirit of Oakland, their Halloween show. And this past year, they had James and Olivia Tate, who is this couple who's buried in Oakland Cemetery. They have this fascinating love story where they were enslaved. They met each other. They got married. Their enslavers moved to different places. They learned to read and write so that they could keep in touch with each other. So when emancipation happened, they met back up. They moved to Atlanta and became 50 rich. And he became like the father of Black business. I kid you not, this is a real story. Look up James and Olivia Tate. You will see them. There's actually a bust of him somewhere in Atlanta. But they helped find Friendship Baptist Church, opened up like the first like colored school for people, that's as they called it at the time. They opened up the first school for people who were enslaved, who needed to learn how to read and write. So it was a real story. And so wow. My favorite, exactly, see? So we never hear those kind of, wait, this is a love story. So I wrote a play about some of their descendants who were actually struggling with their own relationship, who are inherit their letters, and I'm kind of bring themselves to life and kind of relive and understand James and Olivia's plight, but also to how they're like kind of the nuances and the communication that need to happen in their own relationship to kind of heal and to either decide to stay together or decide to leave. And so that's probably one of my favorite projects that I've worked on. And it's actually going to get produced again in San Diego. So I'm expanding it to a longer piece. So that it can be done. But I want to say, but other than that, there's a play that, I'm thinking about a play that I used to love. There's this play that I wrote. It's called All's Fair in Jewels and Dresses. And it was also a shorter play, but it was a spy versus spy kind of play. And Mia Kristen Smith directed it. And I think you've had her do fight choreography. She is, people need to know and see her fight choreography. She's amazing. Because it was spy versus spy. So I was like, it's Black women and they spy. So let's throw them across the stage, do whatever. She had them rolling on the ground, throwing each other, swinging each other around. Like people walked up to them after the production, were like, are y'all hurt for real? And she's like, no, we really just taught good stage choreography. But it was just a lot of fun. It was really playful. It was kind of, it was just, there was a lot of jokes in it. It was just a lot of laughs and a lot of just kind of one of those good time, kind of exciting things. And we don't get a chance to see Black people as spies a lot. So it was just like a very exciting experience. So.
And they both sound very cinematic as well, as you talk about going into film writing. I could see both of those as films as well. So as a writer, I'm sure as you're writing, you have some thoughts, some intentions, some visions. And when you go to see a play or someone's working on your play and it is totally different, how does that affect you?
I think that it can affect you in two different ways. If it's a first production and you're just like, oh, then you kind of are like, hey, y'all, did you read it? What's going on? I think if it's like kind of a later production, you're just kind of like, I understand your expertise and your vision. I think that for me, because we're creatives and because theater is such a community oriented kind of of, I guess, industry is we're meant to collaborate. And so I think that sometimes what I have in my head can be enhanced with your expertise. And so I think if we can have that meeting of the minds to be like, oh, I wrote this way. And you're just like, no, 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 no. I got something else. Because like, I remember I wrote, like, I'll just take me, for example, I wrote All Spells and Fair and Jewels and Dresses. And I was like, I want her to do this and I want her to punch. And she was like, okay, this is really nice. And I want to keep your fight scene. But can I try some things different? And then what she choreographed, I was like, oh, I couldn't have written that. I don't know what I thought a fight scene was, but clearly what you did here was amazing. I don't know what happened. Like, I can't, no, I didn't do that. And so I think that if it all happens in the vein of collaboration and it's really done well, or if it's done in the vein of where the directors really read the stage directions before they started saying, okay, let's reroute some things, I think then that actually makes a difference. I think what makes it difficult for playwrights is when, if they go see their show and it's very clear the director never read their stage directions and didn't understand why they asked for certain things. Or I had a rehearsal once where I'd written something out and the director was like, oh, well, I know what to do with these lines. I want to rework them, blah, blah, blah. He reworked the lines. And he came back to me in rehearsal. He was like, well, these lines don't work. And I was like, did you do them the way I wrote them? And he did them the way I wrote them. And he was like, oh, they work much better. I was like, yes. So this is ritual. So, so this is actually, I wrote it the way it's supposed to be done here. I just think a lot of times some of the misunderstanding and some of that feeling, because playwrights are raised, when they see their work on stage already, like, especially the first time, our little stomachs are just like, okay, it's gonna turn over. And so we're already trying to hold on to our stomach at the moment just to see it, because it is so exciting and so powerful. It's something that we thought of from absolutely nothing is up. But I think that is one of those things that when you have good conversation and good communication, then it can make it so that that experience doesn't happen. I think it's easier though to control well, not necessarily control, it's easier to work with if it's the first time the play is done, whereas if it's a subsequent production, there's not really much you can do about it because people have their own interpretations of things.
We are near the end of our conversation, but is there something that you have not talked about that you would like to express?
That I would like to express. One of the things I really do think about Atlanta theater, especially everything that happened last year with the racial reckoning and theater scrambling, but I also, one of the things that I think a lot about are where are the Black institutions, the ones that, especially like the ones who used to be here, like where are the Black theaters, we have our elders in the arts, but I feel like we don't have community with one another. And I really, really, like, I get it, because when the racial reckoning happened, I was like, yep, theater's gonna theater. They're gonna do what they do. But where are our institutions to, like, when them theaters do what they do, to say, hey, you do know that you still have options with our stage as well. And we can pay you what you need to be paid or what you're looking for. And we can hold you in the love that you need. Because I think that's why Hush Harbor exists, to be like, hey, I want to hold you in this space. And I think that sometimes, because don't get me wrong, like, I mean, we are Black in Atlanta. And even though we've had Black mayors, our Black theater community has not looked like we had Black mayors, or that we even have a Black thriving community. Black thriving community. And most of the plays that we do are either a play that deals with civil rights, or a play that deals with some Black trauma, or is a Black playwright that's not from the South, that writes about a Southern subject and gets it wrong, and really gets it wrong. And you're just like, I grew up down the street. I know like 5 other playwrights who can write this story for you, and you just went to somebody who wasn't even here. So I do think that for me, one of the things that when I think about especially like race in Atlanta, and especially in Black theater, I really want to see the support for Black theaters and Black artists who, whether it is at a white theater company or not, I just want to see more support across the board. And I want us to be able to support each other. Whether we have the people that we work with for the most part, that's fine, whatever. I mean, there's a lot of us. We don't all have to be like kumbaya every day. But I do want to say, hey, elders, are we intentionally mentoring our younger folks? Do they know the history of Atlanta Black theater? And if they don't know the history of Atlanta Black theater, why not? And who was supposed to tell the story? And how can we get it told? Instead of us sometimes all pointing fingers at each other and being like, yeah, well, this happened to me here. And we're like, yeah, okay. I'm not negating your trauma and your hurt. But how can we fix this? What can we be doing to be better and stronger in that? Because also too, I think about, and this is one of the other reasons why Hush Harbor Lab is so important, is that we think about, okay, so what Black playwrights were born or were raised in Atlanta or started their theater career here, or their play career here, and have gone on to Broadway or have gone on to have even had major productions of their work, not just readings. You got Pearl Clegg, then she had best-selling novels before she really started writing plays, right? You have Valletta Anderson, who has done some things. You got Shea Youngblood. Do we have any others?
Tom Jones.
Tom Jones absolutely counts. But I also will say too, like unlike Chicago, New York, or LA, I will say across the board, we don't nurture playwrights from Atlanta like that in general. And that's another larger conversation. We do have a couple, I mean, but you got like Lauren Gunderson, Philip DuPois, Steve Yockey, Topher, who has gone now into doing more TV and film, but I really want to see us really saying as Atlanta, hey, this is who we are as a city. Much in the way that music has been done here, even visual arts has done it. This is who we are as a city. This is where we stand. This is our personality. And so this is who we are in theater. So it reflects the personality that we have. And that does also mean that a lot of different kinds of Black stories will come up. So yeah, so I just think that there's got to be more mentoring. There's got to be more intentional saying, hey, these are our stories, you know, and all of the mosaic of our stories, because there's so many of them. And we're going to fund them all, and we're going to make sure that everybody has the support that they need, and we're going to mentor people where we need to be mentored. It's not going to be transactional, and we're just going to be like, we're just going to live and be vibrant. Black utopia. There you go.
There you go, sister. Well, I appreciate so much you coming and sitting with me on the couch.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for tuning in today for On the Couch. And I'd like to thank Amina for being with us today. Don't forget to comment below, like us, and subscribe. And meanwhile, keep the conversations going.
Let's have a heart-to-heart. Let's have a conversation. Let's have a heart-to-heart. Let's have a consultation. Let's have a heart-to-heart. Let's have a conversation. Let's have a heart-to-heart. Let's have a consultation. On the couch.